The first thing I noticed when I walked back into the house was that the kitchen light was still on. She'd left it on again. That was her thing, never turning off lights in rooms she'd just walked out of. 53 years old, and I'd spent the last 2.5 noticing small things like that. The kind of things you notice when something in your gut is already keeping score, even when your head hasn't caught up yet. I set my keys on the counter and stood there for a minute. Just stood there. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock above the stove. Outside, I could hear a dog barking a few streets over. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that looked like the beginning of the end of a marriage. But that's usually how it goes, isn't it? His name is Len. Leonard Marsh. But nobody who actually knows him calls him that. He's been Len since the 3rd grade, which is exactly when I met him. We were both 8 years old and I'd just moved to a new school in Dayton, Ohio, and he was the only kid who didn't stare at me like I was a science exhibit. He just slid over on the bench at lunch and said, "You like baseball cards?" That was it. That was the whole introduction. 45 years later, that man is still the first person I call when something goes sideways. What we went through together. I'll get to that. You need to understand it first, or the rest of this won't make any sense. We were both drinking too much by our mid-30s. Not the kind of drinking that announces itself, the kind that's quiet and patient and shows up every night in a glass on the coffee table and tells you it's fine. It's just how grown men unwind. My first wife had already left by then. That was fair. I wasn't easy to live with. Len had his own damage from his own years. A job loss. A custody fight that ground him down to almost nothing. We weren't helping each other get better. We were just keeping each other company while we got worse. The night that changed things, I don't talk about much. What I'll say is this. Len showed up at my apartment at 2 a.m. because something I'd said in a phone call scared him. He drove 40 minutes in the rain. He sat on my kitchen floor with me until the sun came up. He didn't lecture me. He didn't call anyone. He just stayed. And when it was light outside, he said, "Okay, what are we going to do about this?" We got sober together. Not at the same time, not perfectly, not without backsliding. But we did it. 11 years ago, I had my last drink. Len has 9 years. Every anniversary, we have breakfast together. Diner food. Bad coffee. We don't make a big deal out of it, it's just something we do. That's who Len is to me. That's what I was being asked to walk away from. I met my wife. I'll call her Sylvia because that's her name, and there's no softening what I'm about to tell you. At a work event about 3 years ago. She was sharp and funny, and she had this way of listening that made you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. I was 50 at the time. I hadn't been in the serious relationship in years. My son Garrett was grown and out of the house. I had a paid-off truck and a small place on the edge of town, and a life that was quiet in a way I'd mostly made peace with. Sylvia was 41. Divorced once before, no kids. She moved fast, not in a way that alarmed me at the time, because it felt like confidence, like she knew what she wanted. Looking back, speed was the point. The less time I had to observe, the better. We got married 14 months after we met. I know that now. Len came to the wedding. He gave a toast that made half the room laugh and the other half tear up, which is exactly the kind of thing Len does. Sylvia smiled through the whole thing. I thought she liked him. The first comment came about 6 weeks in. We were driving home from dinner, and she said almost casually, "Does Len always call you this much?" I said, "Pretty much, yeah." She didn't say anything else, just looked out the window. I filed it away as nothing and forgot about it. The second comment came a couple months later. Len and I had driven up to see a minor league game. We do that a few times a year, have since we were in our 20s, and when I got home that evening, she was quiet in a way I'd learned to read as something more than tired. She said she wished I'd invited her. I said she'd told me she had plans with her friend that weekend. She said that wasn't the point. I still didn't see it. That's the part I'm not proud of. Over the next year and a half, it escalated in the way these things do. Gradually, and then suddenly, she started asking me to call Len back later when he phoned during dinner. Then later became tomorrow. Then, she started going quiet for entire evenings after I'd spent any time with him at all. She said once that she felt like there were 3 people in the marriage. I told her that was unfair. She said a lot of things were unfair. Here is the piece I eventually understood about Sylvia. She was meticulous about control, but she never came at it directly. She didn't yell. She didn't throw things. She applied pressure the way you'd apply it to a slow leak, steadily, patiently, in a way that was hard to name while it was happening. By the time she said what she actually wanted, she'd already spent months making me feel vaguely guilty for something I couldn't quite define. The ultimatum came on a Tuesday. I remember that specifically because Tuesdays I coach a youth baseball clinic out at the rec centre, volunteer thing, been doing it 8 years, and I'd just gotten home. Still had my cleats in my hand. She was sitting at the kitchen table, and she had that stillness she gets when she's already made up her mind about something. She said, "I need you to stop seeing Len. Not reduce, not cut back, stop." I put my cleats down slowly. I said, "What?" She walked me through it like she was presenting a proposal. The friendship was too close, she said. It wasn't normal for 2 grown men to talk every day. She didn't feel like she came first. She needed to feel like she came first. She needed to feel like she came first. If I couldn't give her that, she didn't know if she could stay. I asked her to explain what specifically Len had done to make her feel this way. She said it wasn't about what he'd done. It was about how I prioritized him. I stood in that kitchen for a long moment, and what I felt, I want to be accurate here, wasn't anger. It was something quieter and colder. The feeling of understanding something you'd been half understanding for a long time. I told her I needed to think about it. She said she needed an answer soon. I said okay. What she didn't know was that I'd already found something. About 3 weeks before that Tuesday, I'd come across a document while I was looking for our homeowner's insurance paperwork. It was on the shared drive we kept on the home computer. A folder I'd never opened because the label on it was just a string of letters that didn't mean anything. I clicked it by accident. Inside was a single PDF file. It was a summary sheet from a family law attorney's office. Her name was on it. The date was from 2 months prior. It was the kind of document you get when you've had a consultation about your legal options in a divorce. I closed the folder. I sat in the chair at the desk for a while. Then I opened it again and read every word. I didn't say anything to her that night, or the next night. I thought about what it meant, and I thought about what I wanted to do about it, and I called my own attorney, a guy I knew through a buddy at the rec centre, and I had a conversation that I won't go into detail about here, except to say that by the time Sylvia sat down at that kitchen table on a Tuesday and told me I had to give up Len, I had already spent 3 weeks making sure I understood exactly where I stood. She thought she was running the clock. She didn't know the clock had already run. I want to say something about Len in this part of the story, because he matters here in a way that might surprise you. He knew something was off. Len always knows. He didn't push, that's not who he is. But he'd said to me a few months in that easy way he has, "You doing okay? You seem like you're carrying something." I'd said I was fine. He'd said, "All right." That was it. He didn't dig. He just let me know the door was open. After I found that document, I did call him. Late at night, parked in my truck in the driveway because I didn't want to have the conversation inside the house. I told him what I'd found. There was a silence on the other end of the line, and then he said, "Well, that tells you what you need to know." I said, "Yeah." He said, "What do you need from me?" I said, "Nothing right now. I just needed to tell somebody." He said, "I'm here." That was the whole conversation. 23 words from his side. That's 11 years of sobriety, 45 years of friendship, Two men who know how to say the essential thing and leave the rest alone. Nobody teaches you that. You either build it over decades or you don't have it. I think about that night a lot. After the Tuesday conversation, I took 4 days. I went through the motions, came home, ate dinner, watched television, said goodnight. I've gotten good over the years at not showing the full shape of what I'm thinking. Recovery teaches you that, actually. It teaches you to sit with uncomfortable things without immediately reacting. It's one of the few useful skills that comes out of having had a drinking problem. On the Friday, I told Sylvia I'd like to sit down and talk that evening. She seemed pleased. She probably thought I'd made my decision and it had gone her way. I waited until after dinner. I said, "I've been thinking about what you asked me. I'm not going to stop seeing Len." She started to respond and I said, "I'm not finished." And I told her, calmly, without a raised voice, that I was aware she had consulted a divorce attorney. I told her I knew the date. I told her that I had already spoken with my own attorney and that I understood my options. The colour left her face. I said, "I'm not angry. I want you to understand that, but I need you to understand that I know what's been happening here, and I think we both know that what you've been asking me to do isn't really about Len." She said, "Who told you?" Not a question. Just those 3 words. I told her no one told me. I told her I'd found it by accident and I'd made decisions accordingly. What followed was a difficult hour. She cried at one point, which I'm sure was real. I don't think she was performing. I think she genuinely hadn't expected it to go this way. She said she'd been scared. She said the marriage wasn't what she'd hoped. She said she'd felt alone. I listened to all of it. I believed some of it, but I also knew that being scared does not explain 2 consultations with a lawyer while asking your husband to dismantle a 45-year friendship as cover for a different plan entirely. I told her I thought we needed to talk to someone, a counsellor, before we made any permanent decisions. She agreed. We saw someone twice. After the second session, we both knew, I think. Some things become clear in the room with a third party that won't become clear any other way. We filed the following month. It was mutual by then, at least on paper. She took what was hers. I kept what was mine. My attorney was good, and I had not been unprepared, which helped. I won't pretend it wasn't painful. Divorce is painful even when it's right. Even when you saw it coming. Even when you're the one who found the document in the folder. My son Garrett took it hard at first. He's 26 and he'd liked Sylvia, or at least he'd been willing to like her, which is its own kind of generosity from a kid who had to watch his parents' first marriage end when he was 9 years old. He didn't say I'd made the wrong decision, but he was quiet about it for a while in a way that told me he was sorting through something. Len had actually met Garrett years ago, before Sylvia was even in the picture. Garrett knew who he was, knew the history. Still, I think the divorce stirred up old things for him. Memories of instability, of watching a father not quite have his life together. Fair. Completely fair. About 4 months after the papers were signed, Garrett called me on a Sunday afternoon. He said, "Dad, I'd been thinking about it and I think you did the right thing." I asked him what changed his mind. He said he talked to Len. I said, "When did you talk to Len?" He said Len had called him on his own, without me knowing, just to check on him, had said something like, "Your dad's okay, and if you've got questions about any of it, I'm around." Garrett said they'd ended up talking for almost 2 hours. He said Len had told him about the early years, about the drinking, about who his father had been and who his father had been and who his father had worked to become. I had to take a minute after that phone call. I called Len and said, "You called Garrett." He said, "Kid needed to hear it." I said, "You could have told me you were going to do that." He said, "You would have told me you were going to do that." He wasn't wrong. Here's what I want to say. And I'm going to say it plainly because I think sometimes the plain version is the only version that lands. I am 53 years old. I have been sober for 11 years. I have buried 2 parents, rebuilt a career from scratch after a layoff at 44, raised a son mostly on my own through his teenage years, and I have made more mistakes than I can count, and some that I am still, at this point in my life, still making peace with. Through all of that, every single piece of it, Len Marsh has been there. Not because it was easy, not because it required nothing from him, because he chose to be. Because that's what it means to actually show up for someone across 4 decades. You don't do that for convenience. You don't maintain a friendship like that because it benefits you. You do it because the other person is woven into who you are, and walking away from that would mean walking away from the version of yourself that survived the hard parts. When someone asks you to cut that off, what they're really asking you to do is forget who helped you become the person standing in front of them. I don't think that's something any person has the right to ask of another. And I don't think I was wrong to say no. I'm not going to tell you things are easy now, because I don't think this kind of story ends with easy. What I'll tell you is that I wake up in the morning in a house that's mine, and I sleep without the particular kind of tension that had become so normal I'd stopped noticing it until it was gone. Last month, Len drove down on a Saturday and we went to a flea market out on Route 40. Something we used to do years ago, wandering around looking at old tools and baseball cards and things that used to belong to other people's grandparents. We had lunch at a diner afterward. He got the patty melt. I got the club sandwich. We split a piece of coconut cream pie. We talked about Garrett, who's doing well. We talked about a fishing trip we've been saying we're going to take for about 7 years now. We talked about his sister's retirement and what he might do if he ever actually retired himself, which we both agree is unlikely because Len without something to organise is Len in trouble. We didn't talk about Sylvia. There wasn't anything left to say there. On the drive home, I thought about that 2 a.m. visit 11 years ago. The rain. The kitchen floor. The way the sun had looked when it finally came up through the window. What it had cost him to make that drive. What it had meant that he'd made it anyway. Some debts don't have a dollar figure. You don't settle them. You just try to be the same kind of person to someone else in some other moment when they need it. I'm still working on being that person. Len thinks I'm further along than I give myself credit for. He's probably biased, but after 45 years I've stopped arguing with him about most things. Some fights aren't worth having with the man who helped save your life. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in that marriage. Not the facts of it. I know the facts. I mean the pattern underneath the facts. The way things move when someone is trying to quietly rearrange your life without you noticing. Sylvia didn't come in demanding. She came in charming. The demands came later. Once enough time had passed that I'd stopped seeing her clearly. That's how it works when someone is patient about control. They wait until you're comfortable before they start changing the furniture. And they always start with the people who knew you before they did, the ones who'd notice. Len noticed. He always does. I was the last one to see it, which is embarrassing to admit, but it's true. Here's what I've come to understand about that whole chapter of my life. The choices we make under pressure tell us exactly who we are, but only if we're honest enough to look at them afterward. I could have caved. It would have been easier in the short run. I could have told Len we needed some distance, let the friendship quietly starve the way Sylvia wanted, and kept the peace at home. A lot of men do that. I understand why. The pressure of a marriage is not a small thing, and the desire to make someone happy, someone you chose, someone you believed in, is real and it's not weakness. But I would have known, every single day, what I traded away and what it had cost. Not just Len. Myself. The version of me that got honest 11 years ago and decided to stop running from hard things. You can't build a sober life on the foundation of slowly betraying the person who helped you get there. The math doesn't work. I know because I tried to make it work for 2.5 years. And what I got was a marriage full of tension I couldn't name and a growing sense that I was disappearing. The document I found in that folder, I don't think of it as luck. I think of it as the result of paying attention. Somewhere in those months of something feeling wrong, I had stayed alert enough to catch it. That's not an accident. That's what happens when you spent years learning to sit with discomfort instead of numbing it. Recovery gave me that. Len gave me that, partly. You get honest or you don't. And if you do, eventually you can't unknow what you know. Garrett calling me after he talked to Len. That was the moment I felt the whole thing settle, not because I needed my son's approval, but because it told me that what I'd modelled for him, even imperfectly, had been enough for him to recognise something true when he heard it. That matters more to me than I can easily say. I'm not going to tell you that doing the right thing feels good in the moment. It usually doesn't. It usually feels like loss. The right thing and the easy thing almost never sit in the same chair. What I can tell you is that the right thing tends to compound over time, the way the wrong thing does. Quietly, steadily, in a direction you'll either be grateful for or haunted by. I'd rather be grateful. 53 years old. I've got a long list of things I'd do differently. Marrying faster than I should have is on it. Not saying something sooner is on it. But walking away from Lem, that's not on the list. That was never going to be on the list. Some people come into your life and leave a mark so deep that losing them would mean losing part of the story of who you became. You don't negotiate that away. You don't trade it for someone else's comfort. You protect it the way you'd protect anything that helped keep you alive. That's not stubbornness. That's just knowing what's real.